What if one of the darkest chapters in American history remained hidden for decades, buried under power, money, and silence? What if an entire community was targeted, not because of war or conflict, but because they were suddenly too wealthy? This is the true story behind Killers of the Flower Moon, a story that goes far beyond what most people imagine when they hear the words true crime. The events behind this film take place in the early 20th century, in Oklahoma, and center around the Osage Nation. The Osage people were originally forced off their ancestral lands and relocated to a region that was believed to be worthless. Ironically, that land would later become one of the most valuable pieces of territory in the United States. Beneath the ground of Osage land lay massive oil reserves. When oil was discovered in the early 1900s, everything changed. The Osage suddenly became extremely wealthy, earning money from oil royalties known as headrights. These payments were distributed to registered members of the tribe and passed down through inheritance. At one point, the Osage were considered the wealthiest people per capita in the world. This sudden wealth shocked and disturbed many white Americans at the time. Racism was deeply rooted in society, and many believed indigenous people were incapable of managing money. As a result, the U.S. government imposed a system of guardianship. Under this system, white guardians were appointed to manage the finances of Osage individuals, often without their consent. These guardians controlled bank accounts, approved purchases, and had enormous power over Osage lives. In theory, the system was meant to protect them. In reality, it became a tool for widespread corruption and exploitation. Many guardians stole money openly. Banks overcharged fees. Lawyers manipulated contracts. Doctors and merchants inflated prices. Entire systems profited from the wealth of the Osage, often without consequence. But financial exploitation was only the beginning. In the early 1920s, members of the Osage community began dying under strange and troubling circumstances. At first, these deaths appeared isolated. Some were ruled accidents. Others were blamed on illness or alcoholism. But slowly, a terrifying pattern began to emerge. People were dying one after another, often within the same families. One of the earliest known victims was Anna Brown, a young Osage woman found dead under suspicious circumstances. Her death was officially ruled as alcohol poisoning, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. Not long after, her mother died as well, then her sister, and then other relatives. Each death meant something very specific: inheritance. As family members died, their headrights passed on to the next of kin. In many cases, those next in line were white husbands or associates who had married into Osage families. What looked like personal tragedy began to reveal itself as something much darker. The killings continued. Some victims were poisoned slowly over time. Others were shot. In one horrifying case, a home was destroyed by an explosion in the middle of the night, killing multiple people inside. Still, investigations went nowhere. Local law enforcement often ignored the deaths or failed to investigate properly. Corruption was widespread. Some officials were bribed, while others simply turned a blind eye. Fear spread through the Osage community, as people realized that anyone could be next. This period became known as the Reign of Terror. Estimates vary, but historians believe that dozens, and possibly over 100, Osage individuals were murdered during this time. Many deaths were never officially recorded as homicides. Families were silenced through intimidation, threats, or manipulation. The violence was not chaotic, it was systematic. At the center of this web was a powerful local figure named William Hale. Publicly, he was known as a respected businessman and community leader. He presented himself as a friend to the Osage people. Privately, he was orchestrating one of the most disturbing criminal conspiracies in American history. Hale encouraged his nephew, Ernest Burkhart, to marry an Osage woman named Molly Kyle. Molly came from a family with significant oil headrights. As her relatives began dying, those rights gradually moved closer to Ernest. Behind the scenes, Hale allegedly arranged for hired men to carry out murders. Some victims were poisoned slowly to make their deaths appear natural. Others were killed more violently. Money flowed quietly through the network, hidden behind layers of manipulation and fear. For years, justice seemed impossible. Local authorities were compromised. Witnesses were afraid to speak. Evidence disappeared. Even when people suspected murder, there was little hope that anyone in power would listen. Desperate, members of the Osage Nation reached out to the federal government. At the time, the Bureau of Investigation, which would later become the FBI, was still relatively new and unproven. This case would become one of its first major homicide investigations. The Bureau assigned a former Texas Ranger named Tom White to lead the inquiry. Unlike previous officials, White took a methodical and undercover approach. He assembled a small team and sent agents into the community posing as ranchers, insurance salesmen, and laborers. Slowly, through careful observation and witness interviews, the truth began to emerge. Investigators uncovered evidence connecting Hale and his associates to the murders. Testimonies revealed payments made to hired killers. Patterns of inheritance began to form a clear motive. The mask of respectability surrounding Hale started to crack. Eventually, arrests were made. Ernest Burkhart confessed to his role, implicating his uncle. Trials followed, drawing national attention. William Hale was convicted, though not all crimes were punished, and many victims never received justice. The trials marked a turning point not only for the Osage case but also for federal law enforcement. The investigation helped shape the modern FBI, emphasizing evidence-based investigations rather than confessions or local influence. Despite these convictions, the damage had already been done. Entire families were destroyed. A culture of fear had reshaped a community, and countless crimes were never officially acknowledged. The film Killers of the Flower Moon brings these events back into public consciousness. While it takes some creative liberties for storytelling purposes, its core message remains accurate. Greed, racism, and power enabled a systematic campaign of exploitation and murder. The movie also highlights how justice came too late and how incomplete it truly was. Many of those responsible were never punished. Others served relatively short sentences compared to the scale of their crimes. Perhaps most importantly, the story forces viewers to confront a painful truth about history. These events were not hidden because they were unknown. They were ignored because the victims were indigenous. For decades, this chapter of history received little attention in schools or mainstream media. It was only through research, journalism, and the work of Osage historians that the full scope of the tragedy began to emerge. Today, the Osage Nation continues to preserve the memory of those who were lost. Their story stands as a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked and human lives are treated as expendable. Killers of the Flower Moon is not simply a crime story or a historical drama. It is a reflection on injustice, silence, and accountability. It asks viewers to consider how systems can fail, how greed can override morality, and how long truth can remain buried. The real story behind the movie is painful, complex, and deeply human. It challenges us to remember those who were silenced and to question the systems that allowed such crimes to happen.